So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I was just waiting for the stream to be confirmed in OBS, and it is. I'm back here with the one and the only Thunderous One, and today we're discussing the next installment of our talk on the Qira'at confusion, on the propaganda and the now proven lie that there is only one Quran, and we're now going to show that there is no evidence that Muslims actually know if they have the original, not only Mohammedan Quran, but even the Uthmanic Quran, which in theory is the same thing, but we don't even know, Muslims don't even know if they have the original Quran. So, Thunderous, welcome back.
Hi, everybody, and thank you, Lloyd, for inviting me on this series that you're doing at the moment. And yeah, as you're saying there, Islam is in a state of confusion as to what the Aruf is, the Qira'at is, what the Mohammedan Quran is, what the Uthman Quran is. Indeed, they're not are they in this kind of confusion, but it's totally dismantling internally what the narrative has been, and externally how they've been promoting Islam and the Quran as well. So we're watching Islam, as far as the Quran is concerned, being dismantled incrementally, and people like yourself, Lloyd, are adding a certain contribution to this dismantling on this ideology and its claims.
Yeah, no, well, thanks for acknowledging that. Yeah, I'm doing my best. I'm doing my part. We all play our part in waking people up to Islam. We may not be able to convince the true believers on the other side, but we can do something to inform our side so that our side does not get indoctrinated, so our side knows the truth and is not fed the lies and starts to believe the lies. Yeah, so let's jump into the content. We ended here last week, right? We discussed this page. We spoke of that Islam recognizes 10 canonical ways, and we discussed how the first 7 canonical ways of reading the Quran, it's really just a nice way of saying different versions, right? Because I don't think Allah sent 7 different versions of the Quran down, and He only sent one, I believe, right? This only came in what, the 10th century. The first 7 versions were only canonized in the 10th century. That's 300 years after Mo died. Yes, Thunderous?
No, I was just going to say that there's only one Arabic conversion version in the Quran, the uncreated speech of Allah. So Muslims have to try and reconcile the points that you're raising with the uncreated word or canon of surah and ayah that's in Islamic heaven.
Yeah. So welcome. I see Andrew Martin. Great to see you. Thank you. Maybe I should bring you on live sometime. I know you've got a blog and you know a fair bit, so perhaps I should give you a platform one day. Let me know if that would be interesting to you. Then we can schedule a show. Then also Hebrews 11:1. Welcome, Sergeant Grinch. Always good to see you. Dragon, thank you for all your support and your just being there. Really, really glad to see you. Sheikh Biyardi says it's not necessary to convince the true believers of anything. As the older Muslims die off, the youth will question more. Eventually, Islam will disappear. Yeah, and like a snake slithering between the 2 mosques into its hole, I hope. Yeah. And then, of course, we had, after the 7 were canonized in the 10th century, then you had 3 more. I think this happened in the 12th century, and then in the 14th century, you had another 4. So this is this is hundreds of years after Mo died. Up to 700 years after Mo died, suddenly you have more Qurans popping up, right? And then we mentioned Shadi Nasr talks about this, the transmission of the variant readings of the Quran. So, our new page, we're only going to go for another 50 minutes, and then the Thunderous One has to go. He's in demand. I was able to grab him for just a short period, but the man is in demand. What can I say? So, Quran variation was normal. Welcome, Cowboy in a Hoodie. Shalom. Aloha Strategy. Good day. I'm listening as I smash the bag with apply principles. Okay, welcome. So, then Quran variation was normal. Now, this is a paper by Yasin Dutton, Orality, Literacy, and the 7 Akhruf Hadith. The well-known hadith that the Quran was revealed according to 7 Akhruf, ala Sabati Akhruf, however you pronounce that, indicates that a certain amount of variation in the Quran was considered legitimate, even normal, in the earliest days of Islam. Right? So the dominant view among the traditional scholars is that this initial allowance was then reduced by the decision of the Caliph Utman. So there were multiple Qurans, a multiplicity of Qurans before Utman came along and burned those he didn't like. So with the agreement of the companions to unify the community on one textual skeleton or razm, albeit allowing for various quote-unquote readings, Qira'at, versions in other words, such as those of the 7, the 10, etc., because you have the 7, the 10, the 14. And remember, of each of the readers, right, there are now 14 canonical readers, you have 2 students. So for the 14, you've got 2, so you multiply that by 3 and you get to 42 versions of the Quran. The primary version of the Quran that is common today is the Hafs. And of course, Hafs has 4 versions that are disputed. Not one version of Hafs, 4. Now remember, Hafs would have a companion, so he had a primary canon of the Quran, and then he had the students, Hafs and another guy, who had transmitted that. So you had this Qira'at, then you had the transmitters, the Rawaya, right, with the transmission, and then you've got, so why did they pick not the canon, but they picked the transmitter, and then the transmitter has 4 confusing versions? Any thoughts on that, Thunderous?
Well, I was actually just looking at the date of the article. It says it published online in December the 1st, 2011, and this week Jay Smith and David Wood were celebrating the 4th birthday, as it were, of the holes in the narrative being revealed.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking to myself, the deception of Islam, that only came out by accident with Yasir Qadi Muhammad Hijab 4 years ago, so 2020. This was published in 2011. So that's 9 years previous to the revelation of the holes in the narrative. So that in itself that should be quite alarming in itself, that even if you was to go from a minimal date, right, or the oldest date that you can, this information was already familiar but not revealed in Journal of Islamic Studies. That's a damning indictment.
Wow, that's a really sharp vision there, Thunderous. You picked to notice that. So this was well known. These differences are well known. Yeah, let's continue with this. So why 7 harfs rather than any other number? Well, most people say that either there are 7 basic tribal groupings among the Arabs or there are 7 pure dialects. Both of these are nothing more than empty claims with no evidence to back them up. Others, he says, say that the word 7 is not intended to indicate an exact number, but indicates breadth and ease. So 7 means, we have lots and lots. So
it's like using the word several. It's like using
several,
the word several, isn't it?
So yeah, this starts to get very fuzzy very fast. Yeah, and there's nothing wrong in people reciting the Quran in any dialect of Arabic, since Allah has given them permission to do so. The Arabs use numbers like 7, 70, and 700, not necessarily intending the number, the exact number, but rather referring to a large number or to express exaggeration without specifying an exact amount. I'd say that sounds a lot like making stuff up.
I'd agree with you. And the first thought that came to my mind was when Peter asked Jesus, how many times should I forgive? And Jesus said 77 times, not meaning literal, but figurative. It's an ongoing process with an unlimited way. It seems like the Arabs are somehow kind of using that kind of exaggeration by using a large number, meaning there's no specific, but it's extensive and ongoing.
Yeah, it says, and even if you were to ask forgiveness for them 70 times, Quran 980, and the Prophet said, when speaking about the reward for a good action, up to 700 times that, and many times more. So yeah, it's just they like the number 7, 70, 77, whatever the case might be. So yeah, so verse numbers and the Bismillah, Quran 10:16. So let me see. This is a version of the Quran. This is from a website. Let me just bring up the website here. I'll just bring it up so you guys can see it. I've shown this before on different talks I've done. Right, this is called EnglishQuran.com, and we've got Abdul Manan Omar, right? And then you can pick different versions. So let me see which are the versions that I just had for you guys there. So Abdul Manan Omar and Aziz Ahmed. So let's go find our Aziz Ahmed. So here we've got, and that was, let me double check where I was. 12. Okay, let's scroll down to 10 and Units, 10. There we go. So let's go down to 12. Now, notice this is from verse 12. When a person is in a certain affliction, he calls on us. And if Allah should hasten for men the evil they learn. Notice these are two different verses. I thought all the Qurans are identical, word for word, dot for dot. How come we've got a verse mismatch here? Thunderous. Any ideas?
Well, obviously using different translations. Sorry, you're using different Arabic recitations in order to come up with a different version as far as when they're translating it in English.
Yeah, and they both supposedly have 109 verses, but the verses are mismatched, right? So these are verses that are mismatched, which is interesting because also they have different. The one is using the Bismillah, the other is not. Apparently, you have this problem between different Qurans. But these are not the same verses. Like, look at 15. When our clear verses are recited to them, those who fear not the meeting with us, nor do they cherish any hope. And then on the other side, then we made you vice-regents, so their successors in the earth. Verse 15. So you still have discrepancies in the Quran, even after the Quran was dumped in the Nile. It was burned, it was rewritten. So yeah, you still have differences. Isn't this significant, Thunderous?
Well, are you suggesting then that Allah's Quran in heaven doesn't have the Bismillah at the beginning of every chapter?
I don't know. I mean, Muslims have to tell us, right?
Are you suggesting that the numerical placing of the ayah in the Quran is not in the recension in Islamic heaven?
To be honest, I don't know. I hope some Muslims can clear this up for us because these two verses are not the same. These two verses are not the same. We have a verse mismatch here. So yeah, just thought everyone would find that. Yep. So I'll continue. Now, obviously there are other issues with the Quran as well. Let's talk about Shadi Nasr and Haytham Sidki for a moment. Yeah, so what are you saying though, Thunderous? Are you saying that Allah made a mistake, or do you think that there's a problem with the Quran on earth?
Both.
Okay, fair enough. I'll accept that. So now, this is Haytham Sidki. I'll play this again. This is 60 seconds long, just so you guys get a view of
Islam. There's a general belief that the Quran, from its origin, was multiformal, and what that means is that it was not one Quran, but there were many renditions, many versions of the Quran, and so different people have different conceptions as to where these variations come from. Is it, were they all uttered by the Prophet? Were some of them, did the Prophet, it's called Iqrar, did he hear them and he approved of them? Or were they generated by the companions, and so on and so forth? And unfortunately, actually, so I have heard some preachers that do say that there's only, one reading or one Quran or something like that. And, if I were to be very generous, I would say that falls under the umbrella of like lies to children, if that makes sense. That falls under the umbrella of like lies to children. That falls under the umbrella of like lies to children. That falls under the umbrella of like lies to children.
Yeah, thank you, Haytham Sidki, for that. So hopefully that clarifies the position of Professor Haytham Sidki. So, any comment before I move on, Thunders?
No, continue.
So Haytham Sidki says in his paper Consonantal Dotting and the Oral Quran, 2023, he showed that canonical and non-canonical readings have a common oral ancestor, out of which the variant readings emerged from perhaps shortly after the Utmanic canonization. Right? It says here, please see this summary. The summary that is this one here. I'll drop this in the chat. You guys can then find this in the chat. Right? This is a summary of Haytham Sidki's new article, Consonantal Dotting and the Oral Quran. Right? It's ratibiha.com or ratiba.com. Right? You guys can find a lot of that here. And yeah, so to continue, a careful study of the consonantal, because remember the early razm, the skeletal consonant, the text didn't have these little dots to differentiate between sounds, and it also didn't have any vowels, only had consonants. So a careful study of the consonantal dotting patterns between the canonical readings reveals independent Medinan, Meccan, Basran, and Kufan regional traditions. So you had independent, different versions between Medina, Mecca, Basra, and Kufa. And it's odd, you'd think that the Quran would come from Mecca strictly. You can mention anything, you can speak up anytime you like, Thunderous. People spread the common ancestor oral tradition into different cities where oral variants accrued, leading to the emergence of dozens of Qira'at. dozens. Already we're at 42 versions we've discussed. 10 of which were eventually canonized as a harmonization process, after which it was not possible to tell which, if any, went back to Muhammad. I need to repeat that. There were dozens of versions of Qira'at, 10 of which were canonized, after which it was not possible to tell which, if any, went back to Muhammad. Your thoughts, Thunderous?
Well, you know what? In the discussion that we had last week, and between last week and this week, I had to sort of like look back at history and think to myself, can there be something that we can look at history where the listening audience and other students can possibly look at something in historically where there is something similar that's happened? And the thought that came to my mind was, when you consider Noah's flood, that was the reality that took place. But as mankind spread, that story, that account, that real account that took place, somehow found itself woven with myth and legend. So the crux, or if you like, the basis of the story is still there, but you get different renderings of the same historical accounts. And It's very much the same thing with Islam and the Quran. There was a structure that was possibly there initially, but when it went to these different tribes and these different dialects, it somehow got twisted along the way and suited the audience that it was going to.
Yes,
for instance,
and we have covered that, that they copied or they utilized the version of the Quran that suited their particular theological agenda.
Exactly, but they couldn't trace it back to what the origin was, which is why they were lost. Yeah.
Also, for the audience, I have a short video. It's only 2 minutes, 43 seconds on my channel. It's called The Fourth Son of Noah, Islamic Truth, or Canaanite Baal Myth, because in the Bible, Noah has 3 sons, right? Ham, Shem, and Japheth, right? In Islam, he has 4 sons. He has an extra one. The 4th one dies in the flood. The 4th one is called Yam. Yam is an unbeliever. He joins the unbelievers and he dies in the flood. Of course, now Muslims go, well, the Quran doesn't say what his name was. Well, according to Islamic sources outside of the Quran, they tell you his name is Yam. The Quran says he died, and of course Muslim scholars tell us his name is Yam, so therefore it's Yam, right? And of course the Quran also doesn't say what the names of Muhammad's wives are, so if I'm lying because I'm saying Yam is the 4th son, right, then are Muslims lying when they say what the names of Muhammad's wives are? Just a point on that, Thunderous, I mean, where are Muslims getting the names of Muhammad's wives? Are they lying about the names of his wives? Did they just make it up?
I think they're making it up, dude. I think there's a lot of things. I think if you want to look at a good example of Islam making something up, just type into Google Muhammad genealogy, Adam genealogy to Muhammad, or Muhammad genealogy to Adam, and then look at, or go to Google Images. There is a fantastic example of Muslims making it up, like the wives.
Yeah, and then also, of course, Yam, as you may or may not know, is actually... Now, Yam has another name in Islam, okay? They call him Canaan. Canaan. And Yam is the Canaanite god of water. But he's actually a demonic god. He's a violent god. He's the god of floods. And he fights against the supreme god, Baal. And every year he comes as a flood, and the god Baal fights him and pushes him back. So yeah, it's a Canaanite, Ugaritic, Baal myth. So that's where Yam comes from. So, which is very interesting. Besides the Canaanite aspect, you can go south to Yemen and you can go to East Africa, where I covered in my monotheism series, where I talk about the same character is part of the early... we're going back to 800 BC here. These early roots of Islam within paganism. You'll find Yam there as well. So, claims of mutawatir transmission for this emerged even later still. So, claims of mutawatir transmission of the Quran's verses are not early. They are very, very late. I think they probably go around back to the 14th century, something like that. But they're very late. They come hundreds of years after the Quran. So, scholars did not believe the Quran was transmitted reliably at all. Professor Shadi Nasser thinks that the oral transmission underwent, he calls it, scrupulous editing and revisions. That's in his paper, The Second Canonization of the Quran, or book, published by Brill in 2020. So yes, scrupulous editing and revisions. No shock.
Do you consider Do you consider that to be, when it says scrupulous? When I was going through this material, when it uses that phrase, scrupulous editing and revisions, do you think, when you consider like tame sheep eating verses about breastfeeding, which was probably removed by Aisha, if we go along with the standard Islamic narrative, do you think that there were other things that survived Aisha that were edited centuries later because of how embarrassing they are?
I think so. I'd agree with that. I'd agree. I mean, there are things that are embarrassing in there which remained somehow, or maybe they were placed there to cause embarrassment to a different group. I don't know. It's a confusing mess.
They have to have a book, you see, because they can't take too much away, because they have to have a book. They can't add too much that can be proven false. But the editing I find quite interesting, in as much that they can remove stuff that was too embarrassing or too humiliating, or they found later to not be true.
I mean, did Christians collect and burn all the fake Bibles and then write a new Bible and say that's the original?
But the Muslims demand that that's what's happened. They're asking for a collaboration between the Jews and the Christians to invent a new Bible, an edited version that points to Muhammad, though there's nothing in the Bible that points to Muhammad, and no evidence of a worldwide campaign of a mass Bible burning conspiracy taking place. But yet the Muslims demand that. The irony being here is that what we're looking at here, with the information that you're finding, there seems to be a lot of projection from Muslims about the Bible, when in reality everything that they've accused the Bible of is exactly what's been taking place.
What they've done. And they had Utman collect together the Quran, make one version and burn the rest. The Egyptians did it in 1924. They've done it. Ibn Mujahid did it. I mean, it's happened at least 3 times that we can record in history. So Professor Shadi Nasser states that the dominant and strongest opinion amongst the Muslim scholars holds to the non-tawatur of the canonical Quran readings. The dominant scholarly position in Islam is that the Quranic verses are non-tawatur. They are not reliable. They are not authoritative, because there's one strand. So it goes on. He notes the canonical readings were initially transmitted via single strands, one strand. They are ahad. They are weak. These are da'if. These are weak hadiths between the Prophet and the eponymous readers, rendering their mutawatir status questionable. In other words, the Quran is made up of weak strands that do not have any kind of authority and reliability. Imagine my shock. Yeah. So I just covered this. I actually did a talk on this with Eric, or rather Eric did a talk on my channel a couple of days ago on the preservation of the Bible. We have something like 5,800 manuscripts, which proves how the Bible is preserved. Exactly. So it's a hoax, yeah. So Samuel Green, the different Arabic versions of the Quran, PDF, I recommend you get a copy, ugr.es. So Samuel Green, the different Arabic versions of the Quran. And he says here, right, in this edition of the Quran, Muhammad Fad Karum has collected accepted variant readings from among the 10 accepted readers, and included them in the margin of the 1924 Egyptian Standard Edition of the Hafs version of the Quran. Right? These are not all the variants. There are other variants that could have been included, but the author limited himself to the 10 accepted readers, except there are 14 accepted readers, as we've covered already, as the title, and each one is duplicated with 2 transmitters. So it's, for every one, it's actually a total of 3. 14 becomes 14 times 3. As the title suggests, this makes it easy to know what the variant readings are because they are clearly listed. And he says below is a page from this reference Quran. The versions of the variants are listed in the margin. Approximately 2/3 of the verses have some type of accepted variant. This is approximately 4,000 accepted variants. Your thoughts, Thunderous?
Speechless.
Yeah.
And this would have been known. How old was this information from Samuel Green?
This goes way back. Let me actually, because here, this is a 6-volume encyclopedia set which records all known variants, right? The Encyclopedia of the Quranic Readings with an introduction to readings and famous readers. Can someone in the audience please look up when this was published and when this was written? This it's called Mujam al-Qira'at al-Quraniya Makadima fi Qira'at wa al-Ashar al-Qurra. Yeah, whatever. My Arabic's horrible. So the Encyclopedia of the Quranic Readings with an introduction to readings and famous readers. If someone could please just post in the chat what year this was written, when the scholars put this out, a 6-volume encyclopedia of all known variants. Isn't that a little weird, Thunderous?
Oh, absolutely. And when you so if this is older than 2011, which is what the previous information came from, then that's yet again that just takes it back further than 2011. So we have to look at 2020 and consider how many generations are we dealing with of this deception, and was the lie the Bible, the Quran's never been corrupted or changed or dot and blah blah blah. Was that designed deliberately as a deception to cover this problem that they've got, so that when it does get revealed, it's already firmly entrenched and in place in the Islamic community? That
Thunderous, your audio is fading in and out. It's very soft. I had it was good earlier. Now it's very, very soft. It's coming through very weakly.
I haven't amended any of my settings. Is that any better?
Not really. It's just it's dropped off significantly. I'm going to increase it on my side. But I'm going to jack it up to the maximum on my end. But yeah, your audio's down a bit. Yeah, but anyway, so guys, audio's fine on Cowboy and a Hoodie. Yeah, for some, but I'm hearing a little softer. Okay, so guys, for the audience, there are 6 of these volumes of problems noted by scholars of discrepancies, of variants in the Quran. Even the Muslim scholars know this. If someone can please just look up on Google when this was created, I'd really appreciate that if someone can just drop that date in the chat. Right, non-canonical readings of the Quran, recognition and authenticity, the Himzi reading from Intisar A. Rab from Princeton University. It says, what describes the landscape of Quranic readings before canonization, which is said to have been initiated by Ibn Mujahid, right, from 936, that's the 10th century, 3 centuries after Islam's advent. So what was the landscape of Quranic readings 3 centuries after Islam started? By what criteria did some readings fall within the canon and some outside of the canon? How and why did non-canonical readings persist? I thought there's only one Quran, but the British Library's oldest Quran manuscript is just such a non-conforming copy. So this is now the Birmingham Quran, right? It's just such a non-conforming copy of the Quran that can inform inquiries into the Quranic canon in a few respects. It originates early, so the 7th or 8th centuries. It provides a direct look at variant readings before canonization. So the Birmingham Quran is pre-canonization, and it is a variant. It is not an authentic, reliable Quran. It belongs not to the canonical Damascus tradition, but to that of Hims, about 100 miles north, with some later Damascus additions. Your thoughts, Thunderous?
Well, it's certainly contrary to the 24,000 parchment scrolls and manuscripts that are found of the Bible that testify to the message of the Bible, but no one's ever made the claim that the Bible has any variations in translation or even in written text. Yet here we are, where there's been a narrative set up, and where the information, rather than confirming what they're saying, we're finding information that doesn't corroborate the narrative, but actually undermines significantly the narrative. And this information has actually, and as you've brought out earlier, this information has been known for at least a generation that we know of.
Yeah, and so welcome to General Grievous 19. Yeah. So Akra says, when the Birmingham Quran was first released, Yasser Qari was boasting about it. Later on, he admitted the standard narrative has holes in it. Yeah, and that's the truth. So this is why when Al-Azhar created the 1924 Quran, which took 17 years, they didn't use any old manuscripts. No manuscripts were used. They used the Hafs tradition. They didn't go to the early Qurans that Muslims boast about today, because those are not reliable. Second, though fragmented, the manuscript is sufficiently extensive to permit a detailed analysis of its textual content, its verse divisions, and orthographical style in a way that sheds light on its provenance and production.
Can I just ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Forgive me. As well as on my, when we're looking at earlier copies of manuscripts or recitations, do you think that there would have been a racial prejudice or a racial bias as far as the Arabic versions are concerned? For instance, they wouldn't consider something from north of Africa or an African Arabic rendering as opposed to, say, an Egyptian or an Arabic one, or from Arabia.
It seems they strongly had a preference for these Iraqi versions. Definitely.
Does that not testify then, if they're suggesting that there's a preference to the northern Iraqi ones, which is where all the information seems to be pointing to, does that not suggest then if that could well be the origins of Islam as well then, or the roots of Islam, as opposed to the narrative of being Mecca and Medina, as another reinforcement of that narrative that actually Islam is something further north than what we've been told, and the Quran's assembly confirms that?
Yeah, I mean, clearly, you'd think that all the Qurans would go straight back to Mecca, over and done, period. It doesn't. I mean, well, why are we even vaguely mentioning Iraq as the source of the Quran? I mean, that shouldn't even come up. It shouldn't even be a question.
It shouldn't come up, exactly that. It shouldn't even come up in a conversation.
Yeah. So, evidence that several scribes worked on this Quran. So, here's a question for the Muslims. So, supposedly, Utman said that the Quran had to be collected, and it was collected, and then by Zayd ibn Thabit. But who wrote each one of those chapters of the Quran? Which scribe wrote which chapter of the Quran? Do they have the names of the scribes that connected to the chapters? Do they know? Do they have records of this? Or is this all trust me, bro? So evidence that several scribes worked in this Quran in more than one location across time, indicates how complex and lengthy the endeavor of copying a Quran could be. In this case, the copying process resulted in a hybrid reading, and they're speaking of the Birmingham Quran, that arguably is notable for the extent to which its hybridity apparently went unnoticed or unchallenged. You had a variant Quran that no one batted an eye at because variant Qurans were normal. Any thoughts, Thunderous?
Hidden. Well, it says unnoticed. I would say that's probably more unchallenged than unnoticed.
Yeah, unchallenged, exactly. Unchallenged. Its modest profile may have been the natural result of the small scale of differences between readings, or it may reflect a deliberate hybrid that raised no eyebrows because it did not offend the gatekeepers of the canon.
That's what I wanted to add on the previous paragraph, because one has to bear in mind as well within academia, in fact to the world by extension, that this is the only ideology that can pretty much say what it likes with immunity and impunity, irrespective of what the evidence says, because the moment that you challenge the narrative, maybe there are a lot more braver people now, it's more obvious, but previously, at say 20, 30, 40 years ago, as this information was probably compiled in academia, you would probably find very few people wanting to raise their head above the parapet, because the implication is one way is going to be a death sentence or some kind of vilification. And if we go back to your conversation, was it on Friday?
Yeah.
With because Claire Lopez?
Claire Lopez, yes.
Claire Lopez, and your information several months ago about Arab oil money funding universities, that money would have deliberately quietened down any investigation that was going into Islam and the Quran and its history, and to deliberately suppress it as well. So you would have had academic suppression, if not intimidation from the Muslim world, whether it was direct or indirect. So it's only now this information is coming out now because the internet provides immunity and impunity, and you can do a lot of things under a pseudonym without revealing who you really are.
Yeah, I'm just gonna try and find. I'm trying to find this Arabic encyclopedia of the differences in the Quran. Good grief, no. Good grief. So I did ask the audience, please, if you guys can just try and find out that Arabic encyclopedia. If someone can just find when that thing was published, I'd really appreciate it, because I'm trying to find that. The Encyclopedia of the Variant Readings of the Quran. When was it? I'm trying to find when the original was written. That's the thing. It's the Encyclopedia of the Variants of the Quran. When was the original written? Yeah, if someone can find out when that original was created, that would be really, really helpful. Okay, let's continue. Finally, the manuscript's early provenance can provide insight into the early history of Quranic transmission and the formation of the canon of Quranic readings. When evaluated against works on the Qira'at tradition and its systematizers, the manuscript has clues for a clearer view of the pre-canonical landscape of the readings. And that's from non-canonical readings of the Quran, recognition and authenticity, the Himzi reading. Right, so now we know there are differences. Now, the Uthmanic Razm. The Quran, Uthman canonized, has to a degree survived. The Razm is not free from variation. Some Qira'at disagree with the Uthmanic Razm, that's in Marijn van Putten, when the readers break the rules, published in 2022. The canonical reader who diverged the most, he says, Abu Amr, often did so due to his belief of grammatical errors in the Razm. Right? And the canonization product, so you've got one of the readers states there are grammatical errors in the Razm. I thought Allah's words are perfect, and it was perfectly preserved, dot for dot, letter for letter. The canonization project produced and sent codices of the canonized Quran to 4 centers: Syria, Medina, Basra, and Kufa. However, these regional mushafs contained variants. So the one Quran that Uthman canonized, when he sent it out, it contained differences when he sent it out. Isn't that a strange situation, Thunderous? I thought they burned all the rest, kept one, but now they sent different Qurans out?
The plot thickens, as they say. That's kind of confusing, that if you're trying to canonize one Bible in one language and have one message, so that you don't have people having recitations that contradict or are different between one or another, and you're trying to have a single version, that you're releasing one version with several versions entwined with it. Doesn't seem to make sense.
Yeah. So, and then next, however, these regional mushafs contained Rasmic variants, well-attested variants that affect 36 verses, and poorly attested variants affected another 27. See Cook, the stemma of the regional codices of the Quran, and Sidki on the regionality of Quranic codices. Right? Now, between Qira'at and regional variants, there are more than 40 or more credible Rasmic variants. Okay, though they are not important variants. Curiously, the Sanna and Abu Amr share one variant, right? So this means that you have different strands that are being connected. So you have different variants, and you've got different versions that are located in different strands or different geographic regions. Unfortunately, the Quran pre-canonization is less well understood. Traditionally, the very impetus of the canonization project was to establish a single Quran in light of the variation it was experiencing. So they had to make one Quran because there was so much variation. But why would they then send out Qurans that had differences after canonization? It makes no sense whatsoever. You there, Thunderous?
Yeah. I mean, I'm sorry. I was just sorry. I thought you'd concluded that. I don't quite understand the. You're trying to canonize a book, but then you're sending out a book that's got variants in it, when that totally contradicts what the objective was in the first place.
Yeah, no. FM Knight of the Immaculate Heart says, makes a very good point here. I'm just going to bring up this comment. FM Knight of the Immaculate Heart says, I'm looking for the publishing date, and it's difficult to find even in Arabic, which is my first language. Wow. Yeah, And Sarah says, so many lies, so the reader can no longer separate fact from fiction. Yeah, this is incredibly confusing. Right, and then the Sanna palimpsest may be pre-Uthmanic, and its existing portions of the Quran have the same verses that the Uthmanic Quran does, although it has also several dozen textual variants compared to the Uthmanic, many of which have been attributed, whether correctly or not, to various companions. So now you've got problems with the Birmingham Quran, you've got problems with the Sanna, you don't have the full original Uthmanic Quran, we don't even know what the Uthmanic Quran was. We can only assume that that's the case, and we don't know if that's even the original Quran from Muhammad, because we know that previous Qurans were highly variant, and which variant did Uthman choose? I mean, do you understand the confusion that this is causing?
Absolutely. So, it's a mess.
Yeah. And Sean Anthony, disappearing surahs. Sean Anthony in the 2 lost surahs of the Quran. Now, of course, every single thing that I'm discussing here is will be disputed by Muslim Dawagandists. They will dispute all of this. They will fight every fact, every step of the way. So in the two lost surahs of the Quran, 2019 has convincingly shown that many of Muhammad's companions, notably Ubay ibn Ka'b, accepted an additional 2 surahs, ultimately excluded from the Uthmanic canon, but with significant support for a while afterwards, right? From an academic perspective, there is nothing that makes these excluded surahs any less Quranic than canonized surahs. Because what led to canonization? What made something valid for canonization? They had dozens of versions to choose from. Why choose this one and not that one? So
why omit 2 surahs? Because that would imply then that there are 2 surahs in heaven in Allah's Quran that are not on earth or exist on earth anymore. And if we know that if it can be said that there are 2, that's just the 2 that you know of. How many or more that you don't know of? That also brings into question the lengths of not just the number of chapters, but the lengths as well. What really has been omitted? What is it that we don't have?
Yeah, and we saw that we can even show today with translations there are problems in the chapter orders. The verse order is wrong, right? And the inclusion or the exclusion of the Bismillah. So you've got all of these issues already that exist today that Muslims don't want to talk about very much. Another companion, Ibn Masud, rejected surahs 1, 113, and 114, and he had some impactful textual variants, as did Ubay's codex, as in Quran 61:6, and his Quranic codex enjoyed popularity in Kufa for a while. That's Dutton, Orality, pages 16 to 18. At an even more primitive stage of the evolution of the Quran comes into play questions such as single or multiple authorship of the Quran, whether the Quran grew from an agglomeration of independently circulating and potentially expanding or contracting units. Surahs. In other words, we did mention before that there was the priest, the Byzantine monk, the very last of the early church fathers, St. John of Damascus. He mentioned that the Muslims had 4 books. He didn't say they had one Quran. He said they had a book called the Table, a book called the Women, a book called the Cow, and a book called the Camel, which is St. John of Damascus. That is really odd. He didn't say they had one Quran. They had 4 separate books. And now you've got scholars going on and saying, well, we don't really know if there's one book or multiple books, whether it was books written by different people, whether there's one source that was written. This is turning into more and more of a porridge, Thunderous.
Oh, absolutely. It's a potpourri, but not of a pleasant sort.
Yeah, there have been debates about whether Meccan and Medinan surahs actually correspond to 2 originally distinct texts, which were combined. And that's Said Reynolds, The Quranic Doublets, 2020, corresponding to growing skepticism of the traditional Meccan-Medinan division of Muhammad's career. That's Deshano, Creation and Contemplation, pages 3 and 4. So yeah, were these 2 separate texts that were combined? Is this real? Is this historically false? So there are questions that you've mentioned earlier, the scholarship, the questions go back way before it became an internet phenomenon under Yasser Qadi. Scholars have known this for a long time. The problem is far more severe than we are aware of. So FM Knight says he found volume 3 that was published in January 97. Yeah, but does it? So FM Knight of the Immaculate Heart, thank you for that. Much appreciated. So, however, is it based on an earlier encyclopedia, like let's say a scholar that wrote it in the 16 or 1700s? It's 6 volumes. It's one encyclopedia. It's just printed in 6 volumes because it's so many pages, right? It's so much content. They couldn't make one fat book. They had to break it into 6 pieces. But is it based on an earlier text, or is this work that was done in the 90s and published in the 90s? And Harry Tecklenburg says, wow, you call a book a cow? Yeah, a book cow? Like, yeah, why? I have no idea. So adding verses to the Quran later on, the Book of the Cow. Here we go, the Book of the Cow, an early Quranic codex on papyrus. There you go, and the Book of the Cow. The most comprehensive multiple authorship approach to the Quran is Michael Pregill, from Mishnah to Mohammed. Mishnah, okay, now you're going from Jewish texts to Muhammad, 2023. We now know of a manuscript from the late 7th or early 8th century, which demonstrates at least that Surat al-Baqarah, the cow, Quran 2, could circulate by itself. right? That's Tilia and Fantigum, the Book of the Cow, Brawl 2023, which matches what we're told by St. John of Damascus. This manuscript also contains a notable textual variant in Quran 2, 219, lacking the gambling and wine prohibition, because the Quran hasn't changed. It's the same from the beginning, verse for verse, dot for dot, letter for letter. Any points, Thunderous?
Well, I find it very interesting that that verse has been omitted. That seems like a progression of understanding that might be why that verse was omitted later. So as the text is evolving and written down, going through time, certain things were removed. So going back to the point that was raised earlier, where I think the word was edited, if that be the case, this could be an editing that was more favorable to the Islam of the time when it was edited.
Right. And the omission plausibly makes the narrative progression more logical, page 27. But definitive evidence for the variant being genuine or copyist error is unavailable. As for the expansions and contractions, surahs may have grown after originating. That means editing again. Yes, Thunderous?
Yeah. I was just going to say, see, it says the being very genuine or copyist error. I find it very hard to believe it's going to be a copyist error when you consider the magnitude and responsibility that you have when you're claiming that this is supposed to be God's word. That you would have a copyist error. A copyist isn't somebody that's writing something of his own innovation. He's basically doing a word for word copy. You're writing something down, copying something that's already previously there. That's what a copyist is. I find it very hard to believe that a copyist would make that kind of error to omit a verse, because surely there would have been some kind of proofreading going on, unless it was deliberately edited under direction.
Yeah, I would agree. Now, Guillaume D has made a convincing argument for a 10-verse interpolation in Surah 19, and he calls it the Quranic Mary and the Chronology of the Quran in Early Islam paper from 2023. There were verses, including 1934 to 40, that were added to Surah 19 at a later stage. So in other words, 10 verses were added to Surah 19 or chapter 19 of the Quran later. So more and more scholarship, there is consistent scholarship, and this evidence goes back centuries, not just a week, a month, a year, a decade. This goes back multiple decades. This goes back centuries of changes and differences within the Quran. Interpolations motivated by political aspirations, the desire to promote certain theological views, or hostility towards early figures in Islamic history. We've mentioned one of those figures that the Quran just lambastes. I think it's Abu Lahab. The Quran just randomly, I hate that guy. You know, I'm sorry, Muhammad's like, I hate that guy. He's going to burn in hell, that bastard. Like, just totally random. Like, where'd that come from? Yeah, so we have 5 more minutes with Thunderous. I'll finish this page, Thunderous, and we call it a day maybe, or
okay.
At most. Yeah. Variant order, names, and verse numberings. Post-canonization, the Uthmanic Quran has somewhat survived, with the exception of several dozen minor textual variants and hundreds of variations in dotting, which affect pronunciation. Now, the current canonical readings emerges with Ibn Jazari, right, 1350 to 1429. So now you're looking at you're looking at the 13th century. Variations involving impactful textual variants and the inclusion and exclusion of 5 surahs. Surahs 1 and 113 to 116 is known pre-canonization amongst Muhammad's companions. So now they know this is recorded in Muslims' own sources. It is difficult to understand how the Quran was evolving at a more primitive stage. There are features of a Quranic codex that we can be confident were not preserved. And the surah order, so both the Sana palimpsest and Ibn Masud's codex have a different surah order than the one in the Uthmanic Quran. Fascinating. In 2019, a new manuscript was discovered which follows Utman in the Razm, but Ibn Masud in surah order, called Codex Mashhad, dating to the 1st century after Hijrah. So that's the 8th century for us. See Morteza Kariminia, a new document in the early history of the Quran, Journal of Islamic Manuscripts, 2019. And related thread, how do we know Ibn Masud's codex existed? Yeah. Surah names. For one of the several examples of variations, again see Codex Mashhad, right? Kariminia, a new document, page 302. And verse numberings. There are 7 main systems of verse numberings in the Quran called Kufa, Basra, Homs, Damascus, Mecca, Medina 1, and Medina 2. So 7 systems of verse numberings. Isn't there just one set of verse numbers, Thunderous?
Was there any first? My question is always going to be: are there verse numbers in the Quran in heaven, the uncreated speech of Allah?
No, because if you look at older Qurans, I have a copy of a Quran in PDF from like the 1600s. Because I mean, there are Quran versions that you can get online from the 15, 16, 1700s, and they have no verse numbers. So the verse numbers are a fairly new thing. The verse numbers are actually a fairly new innovation.
Yeah, an innovation where they probably copied it from the Bible, eh?
Probably. I just have to say so. Codex Mashhad has its own versing, distinct from these as well. So now you got 8 versions of numbering the verses in the Quran. So yeah, because it's preserved dot for dot, letter for letter. Also see Reynolds, The Emergence of Islam, 2012, pages 93 to 94. So I don't know why the scholars don't come out and say that this is garbage. They'll have all these wonderful talks and never get to a conclusion where they just tell you flat out this is garbage. No.
They're saying it without saying it, because they're saying it without saying it. This is where I go to with some of the things that scholars are saying, because there's only so far that they can push the envelope on this without either their career being changed or impacting their life, either via their career or via something more serious.
Yeah,
so there's so far you can go with Islam.
Yeah, they'd hate to have to have a terrible Islamic accident in the parking lot, right? Where some guy with a piece of sharp metal decides to have to suddenly suffer from a mental illness and do something nasty.
Yeah, that old chestnut. The guy's not a Muslim. He wasn't shouting Allahu Akbar, and he wasn't going for the throat, but he has got a mental illness.
No, he just shouts Islamic phrases. They don't shout Islam. You got to follow them in the modern idiom. Someone shouting Islamic phrases.
Yeah, his jihad was a struggle with putting his knife in his pocket.
Yep. So, and we'll end up in a minute or two, guys. We've got like 2 minutes and Thunderous has to go. So are these readers or are these editors? Are these 7 Qira'at, 7 readers, which is a nice word of saying variants, variations, versions, but are they editors? Readers have changed the skeletal text. So that's the original Razm that was created. Marijn van Putten published a 2022 paper on this, when the readers break the rules. Disagreement with the consonantal text in the canonical Quranic reading traditions. Fantastic, right? And that is on, let me just see the link that I get. Scholarly Publications, Universiteit Leiden, NL. So yeah, but look it up for yourselves, right? The reader editor who most consistently deviated from the Razm was Abu Amr. Due to Abu Amr was correcting what he perceived as grammatical errors in the original text. The original text was faulty. That such an attitude and deviation existed amongst one of the 10 readers, or 7 readers, or 14 readers, opens up a can of worms when it comes to the concept of perfect preservation. Readings that come down to us that follow the Uthmanic text much more loosely, thus considered non-canonical for that reading, such as the readings of Al-Hasan al-Basri, the Basra teacher of Abu Amr. Then you've got Al-Amas, Kufa, teacher of the canonical Hamza, and Ibn Muhaysin, Mecca. So you've got all of these versions all over the place. I thought it's just the Meccan Quran. Why are there multiple different versions? And we have their full reading still taught centuries after the canonization of the 7. And these are non-canonical readings because they do not follow the Uthmanic text. And these are still taught centuries after the canonization. And then I'll let you go, Thunderous. The companion readings of Ibn Masud and Ubay deviated more radically from the Uthmanic text. The Uthmanic text did not exist to deviate from. Neither reading has come down to us in a complete description, and you could not recite the Quran today according to Ibn Masud, but we have many plausible reports of specific readings attributed to them that do not follow the Uthmanic text. Last word to you, Thunderous, and you can roll, because I know you got to go.
No, so the comment, that second bullet point down, Tenerife, is correct in what he perceived as grammatical errors in the consonant. The problem that we've got with the following people is that perceive or a perception is subjective. Okay, so if you don't know what the narrative is, or if you don't have the original there and you're trying to correct errors, those corrections are going to be what are subjective, where you personally feel. So the perception is his own, not what he objectively sees as grammatical errors, but what he is subjectively perceived as grammatical errors. So that is a damning indictment in itself as well, because what you're going to have then is other people have obviously, if somebody before him has already made corrections, then what you're going to find is a correction of a correction of a correction of a correction of a correction. So
And
where
then
do you draw the line?
Yeah, where do you draw the line? I mean, this is confusing. So guys, I'm as confused as you are. I mean, this is a mess. Scholars know it's a mess. Scholars just don't come out and bluntly say so. But hopefully you understand that there's far more of this, and it goes back a long way. It goes back centuries to the early part of Islam. The Islamic scholars back then already didn't know what the original Quran was, as far as I can tell. Do you think that's a fair conclusion, Thunderous?
I think it's not so. You've done an excellent job on this. When you say that, as far as you're concerned, I will go back to the information that you've already provided, where you've referenced, because all your work has been referencing other people's work. Some of that within the Islamic community. The Islamic community themselves know that they are lying. At the end of the day, they know their narrative is, as even by their own scholars' words, full of holes. It's got holes in the narrative. So, so when they themselves are saying it's got holes, where else is there to go?
Yeah, no, I think we just need to expose those holes and say, look, they're just trying to prop up a lot of nonsense. And he found a second edition in 1988, talk about deliberately confusing people. Yeah. So guys, thank you very much for your time. Lloyd, don't forget to back up on your other channel. I prefer to watch there. YouTube removed the ability to automatically make backups to the other channel. So it's unfortunately, that makes it very difficult. So yeah, guys, I should call it a night here. Thunderous has to go. He has another appointment. So thank you, Thunderous. We'll make a plan to talk in the week or next weekend. And guys, thank you very much for your time and your support. Please, like, share, and subscribe. And thank you all very much for your support of the channel. And I will see you guys tomorrow. I will do the last episode of my talk on early Christianity and Gnosticism. And we'll talk about Christianity's treatment of and respect of women. And we've really contrasted that with how Gnostics treated women. And of course, we know how Islam treats women. And we'll have a look at the respect that St. Paul showed for women within early Christianity. So you're welcome, Philip. Thank you, Dragon, SDRC, Sheikh Biadi, everyone else, Sarah, LOS. Take care, guys. Have a good night. Thank you again. God bless.